I would like to disclose today the abduction of the case of Indigenous Newton James Cantrell Sr., seen in person in 2013 at Colorado FCY in Florence, in a federal court, detained and adjudicated on a false indictment. What I'm disclosing now is Cantrell's dismissal in the Ninth District Court of Appeals. What you see on the screen is what was issued by the Ninth District Court of Appeals and posted on the internet. As shown in the filing, Cantrell and Cantrell's wife and two daughters and his accomplices are indicated, and the appeal has been dismissed. The District Court Register does not have a Cantrell case number, and the last chapter of Cantrell's indictment does not have a record of anyone prosecuting Cantrell. In other words, the grand jury does not know that Cantrell is in prison because he has never prosecuted, and legally he is not prosecuted because of the treaty. But the federal court created a false indictment. A district court judge sentenced him to prison, and when he appealed, 3 appeals court judges dismissed it under the false indictment. I was in the room right next to Cantrell at the FCI Florence prison, and I saw and heard all of Cantrell's cases and treaties. Of course, Cantrell made an appeal and saw 9 judges dismiss it under false charges. Not once, but many times it was dismissed by the Supreme Court. Cantrell is Native American. I saw the indigenous people who had no capital in the federal prison, and all of them were in the federal prison, even though they couldn't be prosecuted like Cantrell. I witnessed it clearly with both my eyes. The indigenous people had a false indictment taken by a federal court prosecutor, which was consistently a false indictment that the grand jury had never charged. I understand that Cantrell's wife is already dead in a women's prison, and Cantrell's 2 daughters are already free. Aboriginal people who are kidnapped, illegally or imprisoned in this way, can't go on the federal court register, so they don't have a presence on the federal court register. They can't exist, and no one can prosecute them. Even if they actually committed a crime because of a treaty between a U.S. federal court and an indigenous people hundreds of years ago, it's impossible to prosecute themselves in a U.S. federal court. Here's something I need to address with the people watching this YouTube. In this way, a federal prosecutor falsely prosecutes a number of indigenous peoples, puts them on their private site, pacer.com, not on the federal court register, scams them as if they were real, conspires with the Court of Appeal and the Court of Appeal to dismiss their cases. This is a federal court crime that started decades ago, a long time ago, and it's still going on. This isn't just for Native Americans. The same goes for American residents who have created false indictments and placed them on pacer.com like Native Americans do. In the United States, if arrested unconditionally, a public defender is appointed according to national law. Then, there has been a practice for a long time in which federal prosecutors make false indictments and imprison them illegally, and public defenders explain false indictments as if they were real. If you're watching this YouTube, please cooperate so that these cruel human rights violations can be revealed. What is an FBI? Usually, an arrest is made by an FBI or a federal agent in order to make an arrest in federal court. If a grand jury fails to prosecute, or if the FBI has arrested someone who cannot, then the FBI cannot hold an arrest warrant. How can you hold an FBI arrest warrant if you don't have one? Since the FBI, prosecutors, judges, including appeals and appeals courts, lawyers, and probation officers are all one criminal organization, countless indigenous and U.S. residents like Cantrell can still be kidnapped and illegally imprisoned. Once again, if you have a conscience working in the legal profession, declare your conscience. Professors of American law schools, if you know what your disciples are doing, stop. What are these things? Do you think it could happen in a democracy wearing a human mask? Next time, we'll reveal Thomas Joseph Patters, who are still kidnapped and illegally imprisoned.